morning and welcome back to another lovely Friday and end of the week. So, just a little bit of a background on the individual that I had you read and whose work we read for this class, this particular lecture. A man by the name normally goes by Augustine of Hippo. He's a bishop, a philosopher, a theologian of the early Christian centuries. He's usually said to have died around 430. The book that the text for today was taken from is his autobiography, which he calls his Confessiones, Confessions in English. He grew up in a kind of mixed marriage family. His mother was a Christian, Catholic. His father was more of a pagan, not really having any religion, but not really believing, kind of practicing some of those old Roman religions. He grows up kind of in a normal environment of his time, very well learned, very well desirous of learning, but very much given into the pleasures of his time, as we see in this second book. Why? Because it highlights for us the deep impact of sin on the human heart. Augustine will eventually go through an immense conversion experience, but that doesn't happen really until his 30s. He's not one that is necessarily born a saint or born holy. It comes to him almost at a later period. But he offers up in the midst of looking at his youth and looking at his early life, looking at the effects and the reality of sin upon the human person, about seeing how it is that at almost every level, at every age, there is the evidence of something going on within the human person. That makes it hard, not even difficult, for them to be able to become the moral creatures that they are able to be, or are supposed to be. What is probably the biggest incident in this book, in this specific text that we were looking at? I remember. How many are going to admit that they didn't read it? The biggest incident Augustine talks about is talking about the famous incident that's known as the pear tree. Where does it start? Somewhere around chapter 3. Augustine talks about that he is basically high school age now. He's about 16 years old. He's hanging out with some of his buddies. Anything any high school boy might do. They're hanging out. They're enjoying those. They pass by a certain field, kind of outside of town. There's a pear tree there in bloom. Everything looks very nice. Everything looks wonderful. But Augustine says, he has this impulse that comes over him to take some of the pears. The tree is not his. It's not his family's. It doesn't belong to him at all. So he and some of them indeed do. He just takes them off. Why did he do it, though? What might be the most obvious reason to take fruit off a tree? What's the most obvious one? Hungry, right? Whether you're hungry in general, whether maybe you're starving, haven't had anything to eat, you're desperate for hunger. Not the case at all with Augustine. Not the case at all. He freely admits, he said, I was not hungry in any way. I did not need it for nourishment. I didn't need it at all. Talks about in this chapter 4 here. I had a desire to commit robbery and did so, compelled neither by hunger nor poverty, but through a distaste for well-being. This is the ultimate effect that sin has on the human person. That sin that leads to remaining in that state of concupiscence, that inclination, that desire, that urge to commit sin. So it almost becomes a vicious cycle. One has committed sin, one has a desire for it. Right? Almost in a sense, the classic teenage rebellion in one way or the other. The effect that sin has on the heart, on the human mind, on the human soul, are deep and immense. It is almost, as it were, a rejumbling or a rewiring of everything. Augustine talks about it here. He says, the deed was foul and I loved it. I loved to perish. I loved my own error. Not for which I erred, but the error itself. What sin causes us to do is to be incapable of utilizing our full humanity. It clouds us. And how does it cloud us? By us giving into our passions. Not in the sense, as we've seen before, of suffering per se, but in that sense of that urging or desire for something. That we become lost in these passions, whatever they may be. More often not pushing us away far from the good that we desire. Whatever good that may be, whether it's the ultimate good God, whether it's a basic good. These passions rise up. And in the broken state of sin, in the decline of concupiscence, we give in to them far too easily. Why? Why is it that sin is so tempting? That's the great question of all this. Sin is tempting because there is in almost everything some level, some depth of goodness to it. Why? Understanding it in the overall Christian story and all that, because all things are created good. Right? We see that in the creation story in Genesis. God makes everything. God sees that it's good. God sees that it's good. Every time the day ends, God sees it's good. When the work is complete, At the end of it, the text reads, God says it is very good. It is good because it is brought about by God and through God. It exists because God wills it. There is always an error in looking in morality to say that anything that exists in this world can be absolutely evil. What do we mean by that? How can we distinguish between good and evil? Are they two opposite forces, or is there some other relationship? How many of you have studied your physics? Whether here, high school, whenever. What is the relationship of hot and cold? What is the relationship of hot and cold? Anybody know? Yeah?
Is it cold, like the absence of heat?
Absolutely. In thermodynamics, they say it's not hot and cold are opposites. No, it's that cold is the absence of heat. So as it were, absolute zero or those absolutely low temperatures are the near total absence of any sort of heat. In the relationship of motion and rest, are they opposite states? No, rest is the absence of motion. That can be relative. I mean, of course, we who are here on planet Earth are technically always constantly moving because the planet is moving. But in relation to where we are right now, we are stationary. At least you all here live, you sitting in your desks, you all watching on the computer. You are stationary. You are lacking motion, the absence of motion. Rest is not the opposite of motion, therefore. It is just the lack, the absence of motion. It is the same in the moral principles with good and evil. Augustine will, in fact, talk about this later in much of his theology. Evil is not the opposite of good, in the sense of some equal force, but of its polar opposite, of its opposition. No, evil is the absence or lack of any good. Evil is the lack or absence of good. It is what happens when one is removed from the source of goodness. From God, ultimately, we say. So insofar as something is removed from it, that is how it is evil. And really, in a sense, this is not anything in the created order that can do this. It is only that which is willful, that can act in its own way. Which hence, as we say in Christianity, leaves really only two possible things that can be evil. Two creatures who can be willful. Humanity and the angels. The pens you are using cannot be evil in and of themselves. Right? They can be used for evil. Right? Pick up a pen to sign away your rights, your life, to sign away somebody's life. But that's not the pen is not itself doing it. It's merely an instrument. Whoever is signing away is doing it. So hence, the material world is not evil really in any way. It is only at most evil in its use, or lacking good in how it is used. But that is not the fault of the material itself. It is our fault. Is it uranium's fault that it's able to create such a massive explosion that can wipe out thousands, hundreds of thousands? No. It is ours for understanding its potential and applying it in such a way. Augustine very much develops this because of an idea that emerged, a prevalent kind of idea, or almost sort of a religion in his time, that saw goodness and evil as kind of two forces that are kind of always in opposition. Famous sort of Yin Yang idea that comes from this idea known as Manichaeism, to say that there are two equal forces, goodness and evil. They're just sort of tugging away at each other. Now, supposedly they say it is good that will triumph, but they never really give an argument as to why or even how. And often the way that this comes out is to see the material world as evil, which is a constant theme in the ancient world. In some form or another, they say the material world is in some way evil, in that sense of opposite or sometimes lacking in the good. Why? More often not because more of the ancients saw it as being linked to the passions that hold us down, passions that keep us lacking from pursuing the ultimate truth or the ultimate good. So in some way, kind of prefiguring an understanding, a Christian understanding of sin. But they blame the material world. Why? Because us becoming material means we require material things. Does the spirit need food? No. Does the spirit need drink? No. Does the spirit need sleep? No. Does the spirit experience sensual pleasures of any sort? No. Spiritual being is not clouded, as it were, by all of it. So it is in that Manichaean system, as in many systems, but evil is material. It is purely the material. The fact that there is material that exists. So the only good to be pursued, the only good, was going beyond the physical, the material. And there would be various levels, various efforts that were done to do this. Immense fastings or cruel exercises to kind of try as much as possible to separate oneself, even only briefly, from the plague of the material. And Platonic philosophy highlights this well. It calls the human person a soul trapped jailed in a body. And it sees us not as being the unity of body and soul, the spiritual and the corporal, but the spiritual trapped, forced into the material. Why? It never necessarily develops well. Why? It just says that it is. So the whole goal of all of that in Platonic philosophy, the goal is to transcend the material. The higher, deeper, truer reality is the spiritual. So we must try to transcend and understand that and pursue that. And our understanding of sin in the Christian context helps us to better understand how it's possible for this imbalance to happen. What is introduced by the original sin, by all of our sins? What is introduced is the disturbance of the balance of reality, not just worlds, or of reality. Hence why these passions are even possible that emerge. They're not exclusive to the sensual pleasures. Why is it, though, so many give in to these passions? So why is it that so many seem to want to do sin, whether even ignoring the general desire for it? What is the ultimate motive that leads one to sin? Almost nobody does it because it is evil. Not denying that it can happen. But the overwhelming majority of the time, a sin is not committed because someone knows and believes it is evil and therefore does it just because they want to be evil. The archetypal cartoonish villain. Oh, it's so terrible. How many people have we ever actually met in our life who were like that? Nobody. What happens is that they are pursuing something that they think is good. They are pursuing something that they believe is good in some form or another. Augustine, again, writing, talking about that. There is a desirableness in all beautiful bodies, he writes, in gold and silver and all things. In bodily contact, sympathy is powerful, and each other sense has its proper adaptation of body. Honor, wealth, all of these things. As we said before, because all of these things exist, there is some sort of goodness in it. Because as we say in Christianity, God is good. God is goodness himself. What happens is that we reprioritize. We shift what we think is good. So instead of the pursuit of the ultimate good, or even of the basic good as it's needed, we elevate something as the supreme good. So we may do honor, for example, or fame, usually kind of the same thing. What else? We may do wealth, right? We may even pursue things that are good in of themselves, but doing it through evil, immoral means. Emphasizing again, the ends do not justify the means. Who is typically said to be the most evil person of the 20th century? Right? Adolf Hitler, right? What was his goal in all that he was doing?
Elimination of Jews and Christians.
What was his goal in doing that, though? Was it just that he just wanted to eliminate them?
Purifying society from what he thought was wrong.
In a sense, yes. Riley?
He also wanted to do world domination to take over Europe.
Yeah. Why, though? He saw it as a good.
He wanted to fix Germany.
First of all, yes. We must always remember the construct in which, the environment in which Hitler arose. Post-World War I Germany, which was a mess thanks to the impositions made by the Allies after the surrender, thrown into political chaos, an economy immensely weak, even though Germany had been one of the most dominant economic powers up to that point. Hitler rises in the midst of that as a force of stability. Hitler and the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Party, arose as a force of stability. People willingly followed them. Some did not, many did not, but some and many did. Because he had a vision, an idea that spurred people on of a strong Germany, a powerful Germany. And yes, taking up one of the many, as it were, positions of Europe in much of its history, taking a blame on a specific group. In his specific case, normally the Jews, which predates Hitler, by the way. He didn't just make that up. It absolutely predates him. So rising to power, he begins to accomplish things that seem good. The country is stabilized. The economy begins to grow. Germany begins to become a major power again. He even unifies Germans back with Germany. The gaining of the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Even supposedly the war with Poland. You're striving to gain Lebensraum, living space, living room. But no, it kept growing. The passion of domination kept growing. But then seeing also the need for political stability, Hitler and his cronies argued that it was sufficient and even indeed necessary for the elimination of specific groups of specific people. Of course, the first group that is identified and targeted are the Jews. They are not the only one. They are perhaps the most famous or the most numerous of those who go in the concentration camps, but not the only ones by far. Various groups of Christians, Catholic and non-Catholic, various political groups, homosexuals, rounding them, putting them as a means of striving to gain peace and stability, which in and of themselves are good things to desire, right? We want peace, we want stability, but it cannot come on unwanted bloodshed. The motivation for sin is never as awful as we may want it to be. It is more often than not flowing from that desire for goodness. What muddles it is that concupiscence and the passions that make it hard for us to pursue, to maintain the fullness of truth. Which then, lacking in truth, lacking in goodness, makes it hard for us to be moral creatures. If the road is covered in snow, it's hard to travel on it, right? Not impossible necessarily, but it's hard. Right? Had that a few weeks ago when it was snowing very hard. That one Wednesday afternoon. Can't go 55 in the snow, can you? Can't go full place. Because if you do, you're more likely going to spin out. You may wreck into somebody else, right? It's the same in the moral life, in the moral journey. If the road is muddied, if the road is covered, it takes a lot more effort and a lot more work to try to get somewhere, to try to obtain one's goal, to attain the ultimate goal, to be good. That's ultimately what morality is about. Any morality, not just Christian morality, any morality. Desire to do good and to avoid evil. But if the compass does not point in the right direction, it is hard to go towards that which we pursue. So the effects of sin overcome anything that the human person desires to do. It is the shade that colors the glasses that we wear in trying to pursue anything. It makes it near on impossible to be able to do that on our own. I want to emphasize that part. On our own. The entirety of the human experience demonstrates that for us. Not just the 20th century, just the totality of history. How hard it is for us to pursue things, even on a smaller level. Even not on the level of great persons who have risen and fallen one way or the other, but even in the common experience of humanity. A great example that is often seen in all of this, or a great parable, perhaps, is not originally a game show.
That was founded in the 1980s.
The game show was, yes. The idea predates it by centuries. And I don't mean the idea for the game show, the concept that is known. Why? What is this wheel of fortune? That a man, an individual, begins at a humble background, with nothing, without much. Perhaps is given an immense opportunity. And perhaps maybe the modern context is able to go, let's say one who is poor but still has some talents and abilities, is very intellectual, is given in our modern context maybe the opportunity to go to Harvard or Yale for free, some exclusive, wonderful university, to do that for free. Let's say that happened to you. That you would somehow earned or received that. Probably take the opportunity, wouldn't you? At least for the influence it has. So his state in life begins to rise. Passes through his classes, obtains a degree, obtains friends and influence, right? Becomes an important person, a lawyer, a doctor, an educator, a politician. Still building off some of their talent and some of their ability, they keep rising. They gain more popularity, they gain more fame. The politician goes from being a mayor to a state representative, to becoming governor even. The lawyer rises, is nominated, and becomes a judge. Rise to a peak, as it were. But what must rise, as Newton's laws of gravity tell us, what rises must ultimately fall. How often this happens, and why do they fall? Not normally because, or exclusively because of the maliciousness of others. That can happen. No, it is the errors of their ways that catch up to them. How many remember the name Harvey Weinstein? What happened with him? What was he known for? What was he famous for being? Right now? He was a film producer. Ran a major film production company. Everybody seemed to want to be in the films that his company was making. Major influence throughout Hollywood, even extending beyond Hollywood, right? What happened? Anybody remember what happened? What happened was people, especially women, began to come forward to accuse him of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, forcing sexual favors. At first, it was maybe one or two, and everybody's like, oh, just being vengeful, whatnot. But they kept coming. They kept coming. They kept coming forward. More and more began to admit that they had to do something like that. And what happened is he began to fall from his position of grace. He began to be charged with these crimes. I think he's still in the process of litigation with all of that, even with civil suits. Why? Because ultimately, the errors of his ways caught up to him. His overindulgence in the passions of pleasure ultimately led to the downfall of everything that he had built up. That's the wheel of fortune. That it all spins around, going up and coming back down. Why? Because at the top, arrogance, pride. Nobody can top me. Oh, nobody can stop me. Well, somebody can very much stop you. If you don't acknowledge that, they will. Augustine commenting on that, thus does pride imitate high estate, whereas you alone are God high above all. And what does ambition seek but honors and renown? whereas you, God alone, are to be honored above all renown forevermore. Through sin, through concupiscence, the reordering of good and evil. Pursuing these things in themselves, not for their ultimate goal, or the one who ultimately grants them. That is what sin does to us. Muddying that path and making it impossible to obtain the ultimate goal. The one thing that is permanent, eternal even. The Psalms put it best. In his riches, man lacks wisdom. He is nothing but a beast that is to be destroyed. It is not that any of these things are evil. They are only evil, they are only bad insofar as they distract us or turn us away from the ultimate pursuit, the ultimate object to be desired. The Christian message of sin is not that everything is evil and everything is bad and everything is to be rejected. No. It is that nothing can truly be appreciated without, except, or through God. Because ultimately everything comes from God and everything is to be returned to him in some way. The sinful mind, the sinful will rejects that and pursues these things as the be-all and end-all. And yet God is so much greater than all of them. Honor and fame, fleeting. How long do we normally say? How's the phrase go? 15 minutes of fame? Pretty easy, pretty quick, pretty fleeting. How many of you know the major artists from 20 years ago? Can name even one. They were all famous, they were all important, they were all great. Almost nobody knows them now without having to look it up. I even struggle remembering some of them. Wealth. What is wealth composed of? Material things. How safe are material things? As safe as society is. They can still be stolen, right? Actually, the argument is it's actually become a little bit easier to steal wealth now, that it's not necessarily physical, right? Just numbers on a computer screen. If there's a strong enough hacker, they could find a way to make it look like their account has billions. Maybe not that much, but. Or they can empty all of yours. Strip it all away. Our identity, even at times, is very easily able to be stolen. I don't think as much as it used to be, but it can still happen. All of these things are not evil in and of themselves. They are only wrong, they are only sinful when they are our everything. So Augustine shows us the deep effects that sin has, the deep possibilities that sin has, of ultimately causing us to lose everything. Because ultimately in it, we lose God. in this state, in this condition, all seems, as it were, lost for the human person, for the human race, for the world. And if just left to our own devices, left to everything that we are, it would be lost. But as we'll see in looking at the next virtue, to look at the virtue of hope, there is something more beyond this realm of sin and concupiscence and the governance, dominance of the passions. There is a possibility to recover that which was lost, to seek that which needs to be sought. Questions, comments, thoughts on any of that? Nothing, Nathan? Nada? Clear as mud? Good. So, we'll end it there for today. Remember to finish up your next writing assignment. It's due the end of the day today. If you're watching this on Friday. So. Read up on the next chapter, I believe chapter 12 and 13. Read up on chapter 13 and Introducing Moral Theology. In our next class, we will talk about the virtue of hope. What does it mean to hope? What are we asking? What are we hoping for in all of that? So we'll see that and look at that on next class. See you then.